Well, hello there. Welcome to Defining Disney, where we seek to answer the ultimate question, what is the best Disney animated movie? I'm your host, Nicole, and I'm joined today by my co-host, Caroline.
Hey there!
Our goal today is to use an objective rubric, with scoring broken down to single points, to score and rank each movie in Disney's animated canon, and to bring our findings to you. We're going to be kicking off our podcast with the movie that started it all, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, which follows a young princess as she flees from the evil queen, her stepmother, who envies her beauty to the pain of death. Now, if you haven't seen Snow White yet, we highly recommend you stop now. We love having you, but there are about to be some major spoilers discussed in depth. Now, we're not entirely sure how you haven't seen this quintessential film, but if that's the case, seriously, go watch it. We'll wait. Now, in our criteria, we are looking at main content such as story, music, theming, character development, costuming, cinematography, popularity, impact on Hollywood, and then our bonus category, which is quotability. Now, we will go ahead and talk about overall story first, which will include items such as the beginning, middle, and end, including a climax, protagonist versus antagonist, the role of dialogue in story development, and an overall feels factor. So let's go ahead and jump into it. First, let's go ahead and talk about the beginning, middle, climax, and end. Caroline?
So, the structure of the story here is pretty cut and dry, I think. The beginning, you're set up really well with the evil queen is jealous. You get kind of the main conflict of the story right off the bat. She tries to have Snow White killed. Snow White runs away. There's the middle section where she's living with the dwarves, and we also see kind of cut in between those dwarf segments, the witch finding out that Snow White is alive, and her transforming into the evil witch. The climax is, of course, when the queen disguised as the evil witch comes to the dwarf's cottage and poisons Snow White, and then the end is pretty much everything after that. The dwarves are alerted to the queen's presence. They chase her. She falls off the cliff. You get kind of a cut to many years later, and surprise, the prince is here, and he saves the day. I feel like the beginning and end are kind of short.
Agreed. I don't think that the movie spends a lot of time on either the beginning or the end. And considering the build-up that this story does with the storybook opening that we got used to with a lot of our classic films, they do a lot of that exposition without having to show a whole lot of the beginning. And then for the end, we did get a decent amount of time of the dwarves chasing the queen, but with the passage of time that we see with Snow White in her sleeping death, there's not a whole lot to show. Showing that passage of time really helps it move on and still explain what's going on without it spending a whole lot of time of the dwarves grieving or people just twiddling their thumbs waiting for the prince to arrive.
That's fair. However, I do think that it still feels very abrupt at the end, especially because we don't get a whole lot of the prince. He's just kind of a device. Oh, surprise, I can save Snow White.
Agreed. He's really the only thing that ties the beginning and the end together. You see him at the very beginning when they have one song, and then you don't see him again until the literal end when he is the plot device to wake Snow White up and they live happily ever after.
Exactly. And I feel like that is... I feel like it's not lazy storytelling, but it's a shortcut almost, because we know nothing about him except that he loves Snow White.
Agreed. And I think in the character development, when we get into that, that's really what plays against this film. Moving into protagonist versus antagonist, though, I think that we have a really clear perspective as to who our protagonist is in the Snow White herself, and the antagonist, which is the evil queen.
Absolutely. You get a really good kind of cut and dry, almost as a foil between the two of them. You get the queen, who wears very dark clothing. You get the purple and the black and the red, and she's very pretty, but she's very harsh. And then you get Snow White, who is soft, and she wears yellow and blue, which are very bright. It's kind of funny because the queen's color is purple and Snow White's color is yellow, and those are opposites on the color wheel.
Yeah, I love that. You can tell from the very beginning, like, who the protagonist and who the antagonist are. There's no beating around the bush on that one. It's very clear from the very beginning. And I like that throughout that struggle between the two of them, the movie itself with the overall story kind of cuts back and forth between the two of them. You get some exposition, you get some story development with Snow White and the dwarves, and then you also get some development with the queen. And it's nice having those two go back and forth a little bit until that climax when they meet each other with the evil queen as the witch and Snow White in the cottage with the dwarves.
Yes, I definitely think that's a strength of the way that this story is told, and that cinematography, the cutting back and forth between the two, I think is a real benefit to how they play up the conflict between the two of them. I also think it's really important to note that, you know, while this movie does get a lot of flack for not developing Snow White as far as her relationship with the prince, we do see that she is in love with him, regardless of how little lead up that love may or may not have had, and she is trying to survive after her stepmother's tried to kill her, while also pining for her prince. She's going through that, you know, growing up phase, and wants to be an adult and in love and in a serious relationship, but is forced into hiding and can't have any of that.
Agreed. The storybook at the beginning with the exposition talks about as she grows older, you know, she is the most beautiful. It doesn't matter that as a scullery maid, she was hiding under rags. She was growing up and she was becoming the most fairest of them all without having to do any work. And part of that growing up does include those feelings that everybody has growing up of wanting to find true love and wanting your own happily ever after. So I think that that's a nice addition as well, where Snow White is trying to understand herself a little bit within that whole character development. How did you feel about the dialogue when it comes to furthering story development?
And see, this is where I feel like the storybook opening and the cut at the end is kind of a weakness, is that it's not even that you get dialogue, you just get words on screen. Nobody's reading it in a narrator sort of way, like the narrator in Peter Pan or the Rooster Alanadale in Robin Hood. You just get words on the screen. If somebody who were blind were watching the movie, listening to the movie, they would get none of that exposition.
I agree. I think that is a lost art of sorts, especially given the time frame. We were still moving out from silent pictures that had exposition on the screen, where that was the only exposition we got, into vocals on the screen themselves. So even though we view it as a weakness now, it definitely was trying to bridge that gap between what we had with silent films moving into that talkies frame in that time period. Now, I do think that the story dialogue, once we actually get into it, there's not a whole lot of dialogue that happens as to, them explaining what's going on. But the dialogue that you do get, particularly with Snow White explaining to the dwarves why she's there, because she's just occupying their house and we're trying to figure out why. There is some of that exposition of saying, I can't leave because my stepmother's trying to kill me. The queen of everything. Yeah, she's trying to cut me out, literally. So I'm happy to stay here and I'll take care of your house because it's a hot mess. Can I just stay here and you guys will be taken care of? even though there's not a whole lot of dialogue there, you do get proper exposition, so it's not just the characters within the film taking advantage of what's going on. There is some of that explanation.
Agreed. And the other really, quick, efficient dialogue moment I like to point out is the lines that Snow White says right before she sings "Someday My Prince Will Come," when the dwarves are asking for a story. She starts to tell the story kind of about herself, and that clues us into, it's not that she's only met the prince once and has only had that one glimpse and poof, she's in love. This is an ongoing feeling that she has had, and that that's something that is important to her, and she really is in love with him. That's pretty much the rest of the story we get for them after the beginning is over.
Yeah, and we do get some more of that storybook writing at the end, which does essentially cut to the chase, and it's all right, well, they lived happily ever after, the end. And it feels abrupt with the modern lens, but when we look back at it, again, I'm of the belief that it kind of bridges that gap from what we saw from silent films into, fulfilling a proper ending for a full-length feature film at the time.
Looking at that in context is definitely important as far as the score is concerned.
Absolutely. I think a section that we can both agree on very strongly, though, is the feels factor that this movie has, because whether a silent film or a film with sound, the feels factor for this movie is undoubtedly, absolutely sky high.
So for me, the first moment that really hit me was the huntsman. The huntsman has just tried to kill her, and his conscience prevented him from doing so, and he told her to run, and she's running through the forest, and everything is terrifying and freaking her out, and things look like scarier things than what they are, and you get this terror and dread and anxiety from her. The sound contributes to that, the animation contributes to that, and Disney really took advantage of this. They put it into their ride at Disneyland and at Disney World in Snow White's Scary Adventures, and honestly, that's where it earns its name.
They weren't lying when they said Scary Adventures. I know you and I have both done the dark ride at Disney World and where it lives now at Disneyland, and that doesn't count in the score, but it is really good to reference if you've not felt that terror and that fear that Snow White feels. You can really feel it as part of that ride, because you're stuck in the dark, you're going through these fast twists and turns, and you don't know which way is up. You're just trying to navigate through the forest. And in reality, in the movie, that's exactly what Snow White was feeling. She doesn't know which way is up. She's trying to find a way out. She's trying to get as fast away from the Wicked Queen as possible. And there's just all of this tension and fear and anxiety that's just at the forefront of her mind. And it's just brilliant the way that the animators were able to capture that. And I think that you see that in other scenes too. I mean, when we see the evil queen disguised as the witch giving the apple to Snow White, and as the
suspense.
Yeah, as the watcher, as the viewer, that apple is poison, and all you want to say is, "No, Snow White, don't bite it. Don't take a bite of the apple." Even though, all your dreams will come true, so you feel that tension. It's so well done. And then even the whole the scene where the queen is creating the poison apple itself, and they are, the apple is being formed, and the evil queen is transforming into the witch. So much tension build, and so much thematic.
It's all the drama.
Yeah, all the drama surrounding it. It's just so good.
Yeah. I also think you really get a lot of devastation from the dwarves at the end when Snow White has apparently died, and you actually see them crying and weeping and sobbing, some of them even Happy, who is happy all of the time. And you don't really notice it until, I think, a second or third watch through, or maybe when you're older, because I don't remember watching it as a kid thinking, oh, I feel so bad for the dwarves, they're so sad, because Disney movies had a happy ending. But you really get that watching it now and understand they're grieving for her. They may have only known her a short time, but that grief is real.
Yeah, and I think that we grew up always knowing what the ultimate result of Snow White was, just because it's such a classic. But that devastation can potentially be cut short if you know what's coming. But the joy that the dwarves have and how happy everyone is when the kiss happens, it's really beautiful, because you can still, even if you didn't understand the devastation and the sadness and the grief that the dwarves had, you still understood the joy, which is really beautiful.
Yeah, I think the best example of that is when Dopey keeps coming back for more kisses.
Yes, love him. He's
just so happy that she's okay and that she's alive and happy herself.
He's so precious. Mm-hmm. So for overall story, we gave Snow White a 16 out of 25%. So let's go ahead and move on to music. Music contains 4 main categories, which is going to be difficulty and complexity, memorability, story advancement, and character development. So let's go ahead and talk about the difficulty and complexity of Snow White's score.
So something my husband pointed out to me while we were watching this is that the score really succeeds at imitating having a live orchestra, as they had done very recently before this movie was originally released. You know, we were talking about going from silent films to talkies, and in silent film theaters, they often would have an orchestra on site in order to score the movie and give you a better feeling for what was going on. And the way that this movie is scored really imitates that quite well.
Yeah, I agree. I also think that the arias that Snow White has are really operatic almost. And you really have that complexity of an aria where I can't sing those very well. I don't even think at the height of my vocal training when I was a child, I was able to pull that off. And it's really beautiful and almost haunting with how wonderful it is. There's definitely a reason that the voice actors of Snow White never ended up doing any other performances, because she knew that her voice was so iconic as Snow White that performing as anyone else or anything else would have taken away from that beauty and joy that Snow White provided.
Yeah, Adriana Caselotti is just an absolute master with this. She is so pure in her vocal tone, and the melodies are high and they're floaty, and they really take advantage of the skill and the strength of her voice.
Yeah, I want to be her when I grow up.
She is a classic.
Classic, for sure. Let's go ahead and talk about memorability next. I'm going to go ahead.
Right into it.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and jump right into memorability. Whistle While You Work stood the test of time. It's one of only 2 songs that I personally like that help me remind myself that I have to do housework, but I can at least make it fun. And I'm gonna totally credit Snow White for making it sound like it was actually a good time as opposed to the drag it normally is.
Yeah, I think there are several songs in here that have stood the test of time. I mean, Whistle While You Work is a phrase that people come out with when you're doing housework. It's not just the song. It's become vernacular in modern day. And Hi-Ho has also kind of done that too. My dad used to say when he was going to work in the morning, hi-ho, off to work I go. And
Same. My dad
send him out the door.
Yeah, my dad loves this movie, so he would sing hi ho every time he would go off to work, and he would whistle, and I've never been able to whistle, so I would always like hum or vocalize along rather than whistle because I can't whistle to save my life. But
that's okay, me either.
That's always something that I will strongly correlate with my dad. And even from a really young age, my dad used to travel for days at a time. And I would always have he would always sing hi ho before he would leave. And then when he came back. So I really resonate that song so strongly with my dad going to work and then ultimately coming back, just like the dwarves did.
Someday My Prince Will Come, which we've already talked about a little bit, is also so iconic. It's become kind of the theme song for the classic princess ballad.
Yeah, I mean, who didn't pretend to waltz in their bedroom and sing Someday My Prince Will Come because they recognized that Snow White was a thing, and having your own happily ever after, however that manifested itself, was beautiful. Mm-hmm. And I think also, not only did we have the modern day power ballad of the I Wish song or, hi ho or whistle while you work, but I also think things like the yodeling in the silly song. We all know that yodel and will yodel along as badly as we can along with it because we know it and love it. And it's so uplifting and joyful.
And Disney actually uses it. It's part of their land music in Fantasyland in Disney World, which I think speaks to the reusability, the memorability, and the recognizability of it for sure.
Absolutely. I mean, who doesn't want to sing the silly song like all the time, especially when you're in Fantasyland, because the whole area and it really promotes that air that you feel of joy and happiness and wanting to go to the next ride as fast as you can. It's just so great for what it really encapsulates for audiences now.
Agreed.
How do you feel about the music when it comes to story advancement?
I think we get a pretty good deal of it through the music. I'm Wishing and One Song is the love story we get between Snow White and the prince, and that really gives us part of the premise of the movie is Snow White wants to be with the prince, but she can't. And that's kind of all of the development we get of that part of the story.
We definitely don't get a whole lot of buildup, but I think that with I'm Wishing and One Song, that really gives you all the exposition you need. The trope of Disney movies now is, okay, well, we're going to get one song with the prince and the princess, and that's it, and they've fallen in love, and then nothing's going to hold them apart. And obviously, Snow White definitely pays its price when it comes to contributing to that trope. But there is a lot that goes on inside of I'm Wishing and One Song that gives you a lot of exposition and character development to understand where both of them are coming from. I think also that it's a really good jump-off point for the entire score because it's constantly moving. From the very first moment when you see Snow White and you get I'm Wishing, the score, whether it's actual lyrics to a song or the score in the background, it's constantly moving and it's constantly supporting what's going on in front of you.
Yeah, I'm Wishing definitely sets the tone for the rest of the film, and the score is reflecting and changing as the action changes and morphs throughout the movie. I think we also get some good story advancement with Hi Ho. It moves along the dwarves to go find Snow White. It shows the passage of time. It also is one of the only kind of peeks into the world of Snow White that we get, because they have a job, and they have a job doing something that has to be relatively lucrative because they're mining gems.
Yeah, I don't know how many people have that job, but the dwarves are covering it pretty well, and it's got to be bringing home good enough money where the 7 of them can live together in a decently sized cottage for the time. I mean, they've got the upper floor, the main floor, and the basement.
Mm-hmm. It also sets up the washing song because they're all dirty. They're all, busy doing manly things and using their axes and
being in the dirt and rocks.
Yes.
And, they've washed recently. Recently, sure. I love that piece because it really does give you a whole lot of exposition as to what is going on in the dwarves' lives, and also explains the disgust and trashy living conditions that they're in. I essentially love the dwarves, but man, their house is a mess. I don't have cobwebs in my own house, and I don't take care of my house that well. But, I don't have cobwebs. I do also like one final note for the story advancement. I like that Snow White sings when speaking or talking about what's going on just doesn't do the trick, which is something that Disney really brought back during the Renaissance, because it follows Broadway films or Broadway musicals. When you can't talk about it anymore, you have to sing about it. And then when you can't sing about it anymore, you got to dance about it. Mm-hmm. And you see that progression where there's so much emotion or so much going into the conversation that you have to sing, because that's the only way to properly express yourself. Finally, I want to talk about character development.
This, I think, is a strong point for the movie. We get character development in almost every single song that the movie features. You get Snow White's optimism and her hopes and dreams in I'm Wishing, and it also points out how she relies on the wishing well as her way out, the thing that she's relying on to change her predicament.
You can definitely see that the wishing well is one of those small things that she uses as that reprieve from that terrible situation. And I think it's also really strong of her and shows her character development of, even though she's in this really crappy situation where, her stepmother hates her, she's dressed her in rags, she's made her a scullery maid in her own house, she's using this wishing well as her outlet. And it really speaks to the strength that Snow White has. People like to say, Snow White is just this one-dimensional character. Like, she knows how to sing pretty well, but she essentially just lives with the dwarves and she's just waiting for this prince to show up. But you can really see her resolve and her ability to look beyond her circumstance, which I think is really strong and really overlooked for a princess.
I totally agree. And it also highlights her agency because she's looking for something to do about her situation. She doesn't want to just sit there. Yeah, it really shows that, like, she's not just waiting around. Now, she does say, someday my prince will come. But for that song, even so, it's someday my prince will come. It's another way of saying someday my circumstances will change. I will have an outlet to change my circumstances rather than just sitting around and waiting for something to change. It is, I believe that my circumstances will change, which is really strong for a female character. And it's different than a lot of people look at it.
Mm-hmm. I do agree with most people that view this movie as one song being the only thing that we know about the prince. But one thing that I do like pointing out, which you might not necessarily see on the first view around, is one song is really important for the character development for Snow White and the prince, because they both know what's going on at the time of the song. It's not just the prince showing up and being all creepy and be like, hey, I got one song for you. It's one song that is in sync with Snow White's heart and her desires. So even though that's really the only character development that we get for the prince, it really shows the connection that the two of them have.
That's totally fair. I think the strongest character development we get through song is all of the dwarf songs. You get Hi-Ho kind of defining them as a group, and then Washing Song and Silly Song individualize them, give them personalities apart from each other, and quirks and fears.
And you also see a little bit of their fun, happy, non-working side with the Washing Song and Silly Song, because Hi-Ho is all about work. It's all about what we do day by day, day in, day out. But then when you get to the Washing Song, when you have to, hand meets soap and you have to wash and you have to do this in order to get dinner for the night, you start seeing those individual personalities come out, Dopey's a great example. Dopey's just trying to play along. He fights with soap and he's just trying to get everything done, but it's just not quite connecting for him. And then
he's such a cutie.
I love him. Oh my God. And then Silly Song is a really great way to see all of those dwarf personalities, because you've got, a couple of them on instruments, a couple of them that end up go dancing with Snow White. You got a couple of them just clapping along. You get that individualization even more, which is really nice.
And I like that none of them are, yes, they have a word that generally defines their personality, but, out of all 7 of them, you really wouldn't expect that the one who plays the organ is grumpy. I like that what they do in Silly Song and the way that they interact with Snow White kind of subverts what you might expect for that single note that their character is initially given.
Agreed. I love the individualization that you can get for the dwarves and really understanding them through music rather than just dialogue or exposition. Mm-hmm. So for music, we have given Snow White a 15 out of 20. Let's go ahead and move on to character development. For character development, we have 2 main criteria. One of them is going to be the range of characters that we see, and then also the growth of character. So let's go ahead and move into range when we're talking about overall development of the characters themselves.
So I think the movie does a really good job of developing the side characters more than many other Disney movies. I mean, half of the dwarves are basically just as developed as the Queen and Snow White.
I absolutely agree. I think you really get a lot of range from Dopey and Grumpy and Doc. Mm-hmm. And even though they're not as developed as the other dwarves, you know what the story is for Sleepy and Bashful and Happy and Sneezy, mm-hmm. because their names define their primary feeling and their primary motive throughout the film. So even though they're not getting a whole lot of screen time or a lot of lyrics or a lot of lines, you know where they're coming from and what they're bringing to the table. Now, on the other hand, as we've talked about a little bit earlier, the prince has no real development. He just shows up on the scene, all hot and bothered, ready to go, and we have no idea where he's from. Does he have a kingdom? I'm not sure. He has a title, but, are we running into a Prince Naveen situation? Does he have a title and nothing else? I don't know. But he just shows up along for the ride, and we really use him as the major plot device in the climax and the ending, with no real reasoning or rhyme behind it.
Yeah, I think this is one of the particular places where the movie kind of drops the ball. It's to have a character that you rely on so heavily for the resolution of the film have so little development is just problematic.
I find it hilarious because I think that the only character that Disney has done dirtier than the prince in this movie is probably Aurora in Sleeping Beauty. But man,
we don't get to talk about when we get to that movie.
Anything. Yeah, we just don't get anything from him, which is just a real shame because he obviously plays such a pivotal role in this film, So now that we know about the development of characters, let's go ahead and talk about the overall growth of characters.
For me, there's not a whole lot of growth within characters. I think Grumpy is kind of the one who gets the biggest change in himself, as he's very anti-Snow White staying, very anti-women, anti-washing, anti-change of any kind.
He's just anti a lot of things.
I mean, Grumpy, it fits him. But I think that by the end of the movie, he not only loves Snow White and feels sad when she is dead asleep, and happy then when she is woken up by the prince, but he also is more willing to help his brothers and more willing to, keep up with the upkeep that Snow White has started in their lives, and he definitely shows a change of heart.
I would agree. I think that the majority of growth does come from the dwarves, because even though they're defined by their primary feeling or emotion, happy, sneezy, bashful, what have you, you do get the most growth from them. All of them said, washing, I don't know that. I don't know her. We don't wash around here. We work in the mines and we come home and eat. That's it. That's the story. You do get that development of, wow, the house is clean. Didn't know that was possible. So you see that change and that growth from them of, well, this has been the status quo for so long, but maybe we can accept something a little bit different and a little bit new. I would say that for the dwarves as well, you do see them begin to trust Snow White. It's not just a demon or a ghost or, a jackal, whatever is in their house when they first come home. You see them trust Snow White. You see them build that rapport, not just because she's a princess, but because she's bringing something to the table. Mm-hmm. And Snow White, even though she doesn't have a whole lot of character growth, as in she changes, she is growing as a person and learning to adapt to her circumstances. Adapting to your circumstances is also part of growth that is oft overlooked because it's just adapting. But in reality, you are growing from your circumstances.
I suppose that's a fair assessment. I think that Snow White, you really see her kind of adapt in that way by offering to exchange service for a place to hide with the dwarves. She doesn't really seem like the type that would start out that savvy, but she knows that she needs a place to survive and a place to live if she's ever going to hide successfully from her stepmother, so she figures out pretty quickly, well, this is what I'm good at. This is what I have to offer. I might as well leverage it.
Yeah, it's really smart for her to come out and say, hey, I know you just know me by my name, and I don't know who the heck you are, but I've kind of taken up shop here. Can we kind of have some kind of exchange, some kind of agreement that works for everyone, that's mutually beneficial? And there is a development and a growth from recognizing that and leveraging that for your benefit. So for character development, we gave Snow White a 10.25 out of 20. For the theming category, we go over subcategories such as setting, dialogue, costuming, and culture, society, and rules. So let's jump into the setting category. How did you feel about the overall setting of the movie when it comes to theming?
I think it's pretty standard. I mean, the animation style is very recognizable, but as far as the setting is concerned, getting landscape shots or building shots without any characters in them, there's a couple other movies that it could potentially be confused for. Pinocchio is one that comes to mind. The castle could pretty easily be confused with another princess film of a similar era, Cinderella, Sleeping Beauty, etc. But at the same time, I think that the castle at the end, the quote-unquote castle in the clouds, that's an iconic shot. Very easily recognizable. Not going to confuse that with any other movie.
Absolutely. I don't think anybody would look at a castle in the clouds and be like, is that Cinderella or is that Snow White? No, we're sure. It's Snow White. It's golden. It's beautiful. It's everywhere. There's no mistaking it for any other movie. But I would agree with your assessment that the setting is fairly standard. I mean, it was revolutionary at the time, but you can definitely see, especially when we move through the golden era films, that the animation style is very similar between the Golden Age films. For theming, how did you feel about the dialogue?
I think the dialogue and accents are generally appropriate, but there's nothing specific to place it in one era or one place, except for the fact that you know that Snow White is a German fairy tale. There's nothing in it that looks especially German to me. There's nothing in it that sounds especially German to me. There's no references to specific kingdoms or cities or even landmarks like the mountains of any kind. It's just kind of a generic storybook setting, which is what the movie is, but at the same time, you don't get anything specific, which is what this category is about.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if at the time in 1937 they were doing a whole lot of trips to Germany and seeing all the theming there. Just reading the room and the decade and everything that was going on, it definitely wasn't something where they were going to say, yes, let's heavily promote German accents and German dialogue. In an age of appeasement, we were not doing that. Now,
that is entirely fair.
One thing that I do think that this movie does do pretty well is that the dialogue, a significant amount of it is in verse, which does give you that storybook fairy tale vibe, rather than it just being like casual conversation that you and I are doing or what was happening in 1937. Not very many people are talking in verse at this time.
That is true. I think that the verse is something you don't really catch on to until like partway through the movie, and then you realize, oh, it's been happening all along. It was something that kind of caught me by surprise. The Queen's lines in the beginning feel like they're in verse, but that's because she's talking to the mirror. But then little by little you notice, well, it's not just her, it's lots of the characters are doing it.
Yeah, it's definitely a recurring theme that isn't something that you understand or recognize right off the bat, but on a rewatch, or if you're watching it as in-depth as we are, you can definitely notice those small things like speaking in verse. It's like, oh, that's what makes this a little bit different than your traditional movie. Mm-hmm. How did you feel about costuming? Because I think the costuming does give you a few extra hints as to what's going on with the overall theme.
For sure. You get, the European fairy tale time and place out of the costuming with the dwarfs' tunics, the style of dress for the Queen and Snow White, and you get a lot more of that specific Western European feel out of that.
Please tell me that queens at the time were all rocking capes like that.
I hope
because
so.
That's the best costuming decision Disney's ever made, ever. I'm not accepting any alternate opinions at this time. The cape is everything. And I'm sorry, Edna Mode is right. We can't rock capes anymore. But the evil queen in 1937 had it going on.
The cape just totally adds to her drama and her development as a force to be reckoned with.
Mm-hmm. Because, I mean, like, how you going to deal with the swish of that cape and think that you're going to talk back to her, think that her idea isn't better than yours? I mean, come on.
I think one other thing to mention with the costuming is that while the dwarves' costumes are all very similar, you do get individualization with them. You get, each of them has kind of their own color palette. And one thing, again, my very observant husband pointed out to me, Doc is the only dwarf with short sleeves.
Mm-hmm.
It visually sets him apart in addition to his glasses, but it really kind of mirrors his character trait of, I'm going to get the job done, the phrase of rolling up your sleeves to get something done, Doc doesn't have sleeves to roll up because he's like that all the time.
Yeah, he's always putting in work. And I think that Dopey is the perfect counter to Doc because his sleeves are way too long and he can't do anything right, which makes him hilarious.
Yes, so I think flop all over the place.
Yeah, I love the costuming choices they especially did with the dwarves because they really help not only with the color scheme for each dwarf, but those types of comparisons that are a little bit more subtle, but really have an impact as to Doc's always getting work done. He's the leader. He's the one you're going to be looking towards. And Dopey is bringing up the rear with his sleeves that are halfway down to his ankles. Hilarious. Final subcategory for theming is the culture, society, and rules. How did you feel that those were explained, followed, etc.?
There's nothing hugely specific explained necessarily, but there's also no major anachronisms except a little bit of dialogue from Grumpy, maybe. But in general, the movie seems to follow its own rules. The magic isn't really explained, which I can kind of take or leave. It seems to generally follow the rules of fairy tale magic. It doesn't seem super far-fetched, and I believe it pretty readily.
Yeah, I mean, evil means you have black magic, and I'm okay with accepting that. I mean, it's just
what's just something in fairy tales.
Yeah, it's just something we take for granted at this point. You know, it's kind of like superhero movies. Sure, you have superpowers. Why? You were bitten by a radioactive spider?
Okay, cool.
Okay, yeah, that checks out. That's fine. So there's definitely some stuff that we take advantage of now. So even though the movie doesn't really explain it very well, it's so common to see in fairy tales that it's not really too hard to believe. It doesn't really suspend my belief in the world. You do see a couple instances where there's a clear break or a difference between the classes. So like the society classes where it's, royalties up top, they're that 1%. Then you've got, everybody else essentially. You do see the huntsmen, you see the dwarves all reference, the royalty, you've got the queen and you've got the princess. It really shows that that kingdom exists and there is that hierarchy. Even though it's not explained in great detail, it's definitely taken into consideration.
Mm-hmm. And we also talked about a little bit earlier, the dwarves have a job in the mine and they know how to make money and provide for themselves. So there's clearly some kind of economic system in place. Again, it's not explained heavily, but it's also not really important to the story.
Yeah, I mean, they're definitely making money somehow. They're doing okay. I don't know if they're living on all the jewel money that you could be making for the amount of jewels and the size of those jewels that they're mining, but they're making some kind of money enough to,
support
be
themselves.
On their own.
Yeah,
they're doing all right. So for theming, we gave Snow White 9 out of 15. All right, moving into cinematography, we go over things such as storytelling power, character development frame by frame, and then just overall beauty and creativity of the shot. So let's go ahead and dive into storytelling power frame by frame.
So here we're kind of looking at the balance of show versus tell, and also the ability of the story to move us through without glossing over any important plot elements through like too many montages or skipping around or things like that. Montage count here I had was 3. And I think that's pretty average for a Disney movie, especially a musical one. There's lots of tell in the beginning with the storybook frames, but we've kind of done that one to death a little bit.
Yeah, we've talked about the storybook frames and how they do give us quite a bit of exposition without showing us what's physically going on. However, I do think that Disney does do a really good job of showing throughout the songs themselves as to what's going on, even if they are using montages in order to get through it. Obviously, I don't know about you, but I don't know if I necessarily want to watch the dwarves hi-ho all the way back home from the mines But, we do get the gist of what's going on with when they're singing hi-ho. All right, they're to or from work. Got it. I wouldn't want to record my commute either when I'm going to or from work. It's 45 minutes. Having anyone sit through that would have to be literal hell. So I'm glad that they do give us that showing throughout the songs without having us sit through the entire commute, if you will.
Agreed. I think the montages are all used really appropriately and pass the time in an effective way for the pacing of the story. I do think one or two, or maybe an entire sequence that's missing from, as far as the storytelling power of each frame, is the prince. Where from? What do? Don't know. We get zero amount of story of his. We get, we don't even get, like, a shot of him coming from his castle to go find Snow White. We get nothing. So I think that's kind of one of the weaknesses, potentially, of the storytelling power here of each frame.
Definitely. I don't think that Snow White has too many weaknesses overall in this category, but obviously the prince, as we've talked about before, he's really that a thorn in their side for coming in regards to character development or storytelling or history or anything, really. But moving to character development frame by frame, I do like the decisions that Disney made when it came to character development and using cinematography to help build that up.
I totally agree. I mean, the dwarves are a prime example of this. We kind of talked about Doc and Dopey as foils earlier on, and Doc is always shown in the front and Dopey is always shown in the back of the shot, and it's very clearly intentional. In fact, it's almost always the same order, and I think you noticed that, Nicole, that it's Doc, grumpy, happy, bashful, sleepy, sneezy, Dopey, like 90% of the time.
Yep, I had a bunch of stuffed animals, or my dad, rather, had a bunch of stuffed animals of all the dwarves, and he had a couch in his office, and I would always line them up the same way that they're shown in the movie every time, because that's how I always memorized their names, because they always showed up the exact same way. It really shows that consistency, and whether or not that's the dwarves just being OCD or the animator showing and really driving home their importance and their place within their own group. It's really smart. Another real strength that they have for character development is the evil queen, because you are always getting these wide angles and these really wide shots of the queen to show just how intimidating she is. You never see her from too far of a distance. You never see her from above or from below. You're always getting that straight on wide angle shot. And it's just so perfect for her.
Like I was saying earlier, it's the drama. The particular shot that comes to mind for me is the sequence where she finds out from the mirror that Snow White is still alive, and she sweeps down the stairs to her evil magic laboratory, and her cape is flowing behind her, and you get this zoomed out shot of the staircase as she's, as she's descending, and it's majestic.
Oh yeah, majestic in all the evil ways. I mean, if you didn't try that as a kid, you're probably not a chaotic neutral, but I did. I was definitely into that and thought that was amazing. There was a reason that my mother and I both dressed as the evil queen for Halloween, multiple Halloweens in a row.
Amazing.
She was just the most intimidating, evil, just the personification of evil villain.
Mm-hmm. And I think, talking about some of the animation here, you get different styles of movement from each of the dwarves in the silly song. That really helps individualize them, like we were talking about earlier. It gives them their own styles and personalities. You get Sneezy standing on Dopey's shoulders, or no, vice versa. Dopey standing on Sneezy's shoulders to dance with Snow White. So you get kind of that gangly, leaning back and forth kind of movement from them, and you get a little more control from Doc, and then Happy, he's very, like, bouncy. I think it's really cool.
Yeah, I think the way that they're able to capture the dwarves with the cinematography is really intelligent. And then also a real big strength of this section is the lighting that they use. And it really shows that character development. You know, in those really high tension moments, like in the forest, you get those really dark scenes. You know, it really feels like there is no light at the end of the tunnel. It's literal and figurative. You know, you have no light. All you have are these eyes staring at you. It's really powerful. And then you do get the same thing in the climax when the queen is quickly approaching her own death. It's very dark. All you get is the lightning as the only real light in those moments. And when the queen has her ultimate downfall, it's with a crack of lightning. So it's really powerful, the way that they use the lighting overall.
I absolutely agree.
I think bleeds into the final category of cinematography, which is just the overall beauty and creativity frame by frame.
Yeah, the queen gets so many cool moments between that lightning blast as she's falling off the edge of the cliff. She also has this super cool shot. It's her reflection in the chalice, and her face just fits perfectly in the shape of the chalice of the potion she's about to drink. That had to be a super advanced animation trick for the time, and it was done just so well.
Yeah, I think the choices that they did for creativity's sake and beauty's sake with the queen are just really poignant and on point for this film. I think a couple other highlights are going to be like the landscapes that you see at the beginning when you're introduced to the castle overall. You get that panoramic type shot and you see the castle surrounded by the forest. That becomes a really infamous or famous shot of the way to view a castle surrounded by the forest. Disney ends up reusing that type of shot over and over again. One that's also really famous is Beauty and the Beast. That's how they open Beauty and the Beast as well. So it works for the animation, and I think that it's gorgeous.
It makes you want to, echo Flynn Rider. Guys, I want a castle.
Hey, Flynn had a point right there. I also think that a really underrated portion for beauty and creativity is the forest sequence. I know that we talked about it a little bit with the darkness and the lack of light, but when Snow White is escaping the huntsman and running away from literally everything that she knows, that forest takes on almost an anthropomorphic life, and you can see the fear personified in the eyes that she sees within the forest. Everything that's around her is out to get her. And that's really a great personification of the anxiety and fear that Snow White has at the time. Not only does she see eyes in trees, but those eyes are part of trees that are coming to attack her. There are sticks in the water that are alligators. All of these references that she has, she's taking what is at face value and it's coming to life to come after her, which is a really beautiful personification of what she's feeling at the time. And being able to capture that on film or in a drawing for an animated feature is really beyond its time, especially since this was the first full-length animated feature. To be able to capture such strong emotions like that is such a high point for this movie.
It's so special. I totally agree. I think also something that was really revolutionary with the way that they animated this movie was the dancing sequence in Silly Song. The animators were really showing off what they could do, the different ways they could make characters move, the different depths of field, the way they could make the instruments move and make it looked like they were really playing them in real life. It was almost like okay, let's see how many different tricks we've learned and things we've made up that we can make work in this scene.
Yeah, it basically was the animator saying, hey, we've got this technology. Look what we can do. That's cool. Watch this. And I think that they really put the cherry on top with the castle in the sky at the end, which is what we were talking about earlier. The castle being, you know, golden in the clouds with the choir. I mean, come on. You can't end a movie any better than that. So all in all, cinematography scored a 7.5 out of 10. Let's go ahead and move into the popularity category, where we look at things like reviews, the box office, and continued usage. And man, did Snow White deliver on this category.
Oh my gosh.
Let's go ahead and roll into those reviews, and let's talk about how much Snow White marked its place in society with popularity.
Oh my gosh. So even to this day, in modern day, you know, review aggregators like Rotten Tomatoes and Metacritic, Rotten Tomatoes, it has a 98%. I can't name any other films that are scoring that high on Rotten Tomatoes today, you know, almost a century after they were originally released.
Yeah, like, it's practically...
This crazy talk.
Practically unheard of. I mean, it's 83 years later and we're still scoring in the high 90s. Also important to note for this movie is that the filmmakers at the time were flabbergasted even then. I mean, these reviews aren't just because the film's nostalgic or we understand its importance in history. There were filmmakers like Eisenstein and Charlie Chaplin that really thought that this was the greatest movie of all time. I mean, it was just something that was never seen before and was really understood at the time to be truly groundbreaking for itself.
Yeah, some critics even said that the audience was going to forget they were even watching animation because this was so next level, which I think is a testament to the dedication of the animators and the team that was working on the multiplane camera technology. I think it's a testament to Walt Disney and his determination to change the art form of animation.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I know that there was a time in the early 90s when people thought that Doom was the most realistic video game you could ever play in the history of video games, and it was never going to improve from that. And we look at Doom now and we're like, oh man, we really improved from that. But animators and audiences had the same perspective on Snow White. Yeah, it doesn't look as realistic now, but at the time, with the animation style that was available and the technology that was available, it was unheard of. It was just that good.
It was revolutionary, for sure. And I mean, the box office reflected that.
Yeah, for sure. Moving into the box office, this movie earned money. I mean,
made bank.
Stupid money. It earned, according to the current estimates that I have, it looks like it earned over $418 million at the box office. And that's not just initial theatrical release, but that's the re-releases that this movie had. They have brought this movie back into theaters multiple times and said, you know what? This movie's so good, we're watching it again in theaters on the silver screen.
I honestly wouldn't be surprised if Snow White is one of the movies that they start bringing back to theaters once theaters reopen after COVID-19, because it is such a quintessential classic, and it has done so well with re-releases in the past. You know, this 418 million number is over its lifetime. It's adjusted for inflation. It's including re-releases, but that counts it among the top 10 grossing American films of all time.
And then on top of that, when you're looking at combined theater and home release revenue, it earned over $1 billion with a B. $1 billion in revenue. This movie has paid out dividends for this company. I mean, Disney could have just sat on its laurels with this movie. And the fact that they've just kept on going after it shows that this company was just determined to not be a one and done. But really, with their first hit, they were there, man.
Yeah. Yeah, they had made their mark in history, whether they were a one and done or not. Like, this was that kind of a groundbreaking movie. And I think that kind of rolls right into Disney's continued usage of the movie.
Oh, yeah. For continued usage, I mean, we see Snow White and her constituents all throughout the parks. We've talked about the ride a couple times. That's still at Disneyland. We have Seven Dwarfs Mine Train at Walt Disney World and Magic Kingdom. You can meet Snow White just about anywhere. If you're a villains lover like I am, you can find the Evil Queen if you really want to. I mean, you can see these characters almost anywhere at any time, no matter what theme park you're in.
And then, as the years have gone by, Disney has continued to use the property, even in modern day. Like, there's a dwarf-centric TV show on Disney XD. It was called 7D. It ran for 2 years. I'm pretty sure it's on Disney Plus. Don't quote me on that. But...
well, if it's not there yet, I'm sure it will be one day. I know we petitioned to get the Proud Family on Disney Plus, so...
and that worked.
And that worked just fine. I've watched that entire season multiple times already, but you can tell that if people find a need for it or they clamor about it until they get it, it's gonna show up on Disney Plus. There was also talk of a live-action film that was a spin-off based off of Snow White's sister called Rose Red. There hasn't been any updates since 2018, but considering how much free time screenwriters have on their hands right now, we might be getting some updates on it soon if it gets the green light.
And it was Brie Larson who was actually rumored to be starring as Rose Red in that particular production. So, since she has such a great relationship with Disney right now after Captain Marvel, I wouldn't be surprised if she were still in talks for the role.
I'm pro Brie Larson in anything right now.
Amen.
There's also talk of a live-action film for this as well. I believe that it got the green light because it was supposed to start filming earlier this year. Obviously, that was put on indefinite hiatus, as so many other things have. But if that got the green light,
it's common.
We all have feelings about live-action remakes, but there's always hope for a good live-action remake. There's always hope.
One. Just give me one good one, Disney,
Just
please.
give me one good one, please. So for popularity, Snow White got a whopping 4.75 out of 5.
But if you think that score is big,
just you wait.
This next category.
Just you wait until this next category. So speaking of that final category, let's go ahead and talk about the impact on Hollywood. So this is going to be things like accolades, innovations, and precedents. And we've already touched on it a little bit before, but man, did Snow White have its own impact on Hollywood.
It cleaned up.
It cleaned house and took no prisoners. When we talk about accolades, they created a special achievement Oscar just for this movie. Because we'll talk about in all the future films, the best animated feature category, best score, best this, best that. Not very many films can say that they had a special achievement Oscar that not only was created for them, but statues for Snow White and then all seven dwarves as mini statuettes were created for this movie for the special achievement. The Academy recognized how important this movie was and that they did not have an Oscar that could accurately honor this movie the way that they needed to.
There was no adequate award. They had to invent one.
They invented one just for Snow White. And then because of that, we can move into the innovations category. Because obviously, if you have to create a special Oscar just for a full-length animated film, it's because it was innovative AF.
I mean, it's the first ever full-length animated film, which spawned an entire genre and several other studios after Disney's success. Like,
you mean like the Best Animated Film Academy Award? I mean, not only was it the first ever full-length animated film, they used multiplane camera, which was unheard of. Even the paint that they needed to use for Snow White and the Evil Queen's skin, because it was so fair, the technique that they had to create, it did not exist at the time, they had to create it in order to adequately paint the Evil Queen and Snow White for the animation. It was so complex and so difficult, they completely abandoned it after using this film. There was 1 or 2 instances that they used it within Fantasia and Pinocchio, and after that they were like, nah, this is too difficult. We're getting rid of this. So it really speaks to the innovations that they had to use for this film, which also helps set it apart.
And I mean, it launched Disney's success. Like, the profits from this movie was what allowed Walt Disney to go ahead and build what we know now as the Walt Disney Studios in Burbank.
Yeah, and he had to take out like a loan or an extra mortgage against his house.
I think
he had to get personal loans. I mean, he put everything on the line for this film. So if it wasn't going to be successful, Walt Disney was going to be ruined. He would have been a laughingstock. We would have never seen any of Walt Disney as it is today. And then when it comes to precedence, obviously, because it did so well, it really set the tone for all of the animated films that we see and love and know from Disney today.
Yeah, and it's actually one of the first 25 films that the Library of Congress decided to preserve.
Hello, the Library of Congress? That is so iconic. It would be like 2,000 years ago, we were like, yeah, this scroll, just casually went into the Library of Alexandria. Just casual, no big deal. First 25 films that was in there. And it was one of a handful of animated films that were the first 25. So, I mean, it was obviously important, and that was done back in the 90s. So it's not like, oh, yeah, well, they did that in like 1940. There wasn't a whole pool to choose from. No. They had a whole lot of movies to choose from, and Snow White was still one of the first 25. So with all that being said, this is going to be one of those categories where we gave full marks, 5 out of 5, because of course we did. It's Snow White. Have you been paying attention the last 5 minutes? It deserves full marks, 5 out of 5.
This is our gold standard for this category, and it really sets the bar for any future movie that we'll talk about.
And finally, the final category, which is purely a bonus category, is going to be quotability. And we have 2 main criterion for this: iconicity and writing. So for iconicity, I think that we are all in agreement that there are a couple lines and a couple things that happen in this movie that have transcended the film itself.
Oh, totally.
And are iconic no matter what.
I mean, mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all, is actually not the quote that the Queen says.
It's not the quote at all.
But that is the quote that has become famous from this movie and that everyone has kind of picked up on and continued using over the last 83 years.
Yeah, and I don't know how many people will be like, hey, do you know where Mirror, Mirror on the Wall comes from? I don't think very many people are going to look back at you and go, maybe a movie? No, it's from Snow White. Nobody's under any type of pretense that it's from anything else. One of the other things that I think has really transcended the film itself is the poison apple trope. Not just because it was featured in this movie, but because when you think about fairy tales and those type of endings on how the bad guy is gonna get the princess, the poison apple is gonna do you in. Mm-hmm. And that is really iconic and is very specific to this film's itself.
And it's even used as a metaphor in talking about other works of literature, whether film or writing.
Yeah, it's pretty great. And I love this movie, so I'm not going to be mad at anything that's iconic and transcends the film itself. Now, talking about things that will transcend the film itself and are easily recognized, we also want to talk about the writing. Was the writing witty? Do we remember a lot of the quotes from it? And not just the songs themselves, because we've given the songs their own category, but does the dialogue and do certain quotes have their own wit? And can we remember them on like another watch through, or if you hear it, go, oh yeah, that's from Snow White?
I think the best lines here come from Grumpy.
Most definitely. I know that when I watched through this movie with you not too long ago, Snow White goes, how do you do? And Grumpy goes, how do you do what? Love it. So iconic. He is so great.
My dad has had a Grumpy hat, I think, every year since I was like 4. And he wore the same one for the longest time. And then we were at Disney World and he forgot to take it off and sit on it. And so it was on his head when we went down the first drop of Big Thunder Mountain, and it went whoosh right off of his head. He was so upset. And I was so upset because I had given it to him for Father's Day. And so immediately after we got off the ride, we went to a shop and we found him a new Grumpy hat.
I'll talk about it a little bit later as to like why I subjectively love this movie, but my dad has personified Grumpy literally my entire life. So Grumpy quotes will always get me in my feels because they're just so hilarious and they're just so perfect. Now, one thing that I know that we've talked about earlier is Dopey acting as the perfect foil for characters like Doc and Grumpy. And Dopey doesn't have any lines in this film. They even specifically say, like, no, it's not that he's a mute. He just don't talk any. You know, he never learned how. So the animators really had a difficult task ahead of them of giving him life and character without any lines specifically. And I don't know about you, but I've gone through my GIF, library, and I have so many Dopey GIFs, it's not even funny, because he has so much life and character and joy, and so many expressions that are applicable to life. They're just so good, and I think that really just goes mostly to the animators, but it does go into consideration the writing surrounding Dopey to understand what's going on, even though he doesn't have any words.
Yeah, his expressions are almost like his dialogue. He's just so lovable that you can't help it.
He keeps coming back for forehead kisses. I mean, it's so cute.
I had Dopey slippers when I was small.
Oh my god, so did my brother. They're just so cute. He's just so perfect. So for quotability score, we gave Snow White 2.5 out of 5 total points.
One thing we love doing is getting feedback from our listeners. We've taken on this quest not just for ourselves, but for you. So your thoughts and opinions are very important to us. Here's what some of you had to say about Snow White. When we did our watch along on Twitter, when we first began, we issued a challenge to the internet as a whole, because we didn't have any followers at the time, talking about the animation during Silly Songs, specifically Snow White clapping along as the dwarfs play. And we said, if you can name the movie, we'll feature you in our first episode. And at Merlin Island responded to us saying the original animation was from Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, but was reused for Maid Marian clapping during the dancing scene in Robin Hood. This was due to the animation studio suffering financially in the 80s. They also reused animation in Sword in the Stone, The Aristocats, Oliver and Company, and a few others. I love that other people know this.
Yeah, I actually, in my research, found like a whole wiki section that was talking about recycled animation specifically. And even though Disney went through a really dark period of not having a whole lot of money, not having a whole lot of ideas to pull from, you can still see how good that animation was back from the 1930s, that they could still use it in the 1970s, which I think is really poignant for this film specifically.
I think it speaks to the quality of animation at the time. Like, they were pushing the boundaries so much that it continued to be relevant stylistically for decades to come.
Yeah, it's wild. So, good job, guys. We're glad that you guys noticed as well.
Yes, and thank you so much, Merlin Island, for being our very first Twitter follower. And we hope that you will all follow us on Twitter at Defining Disney and join our email list called our Ohana to download our score along guide, which will help you watch along and score along with us as we do our weekly watch throughs.
Now, we do want to give you guys a disclaimer. Just because a movie gets a certain rating from us doesn't mean you must or must not love it. feelings are subjective, and Disney movies are successful because they play on those feelings. They're nostalgic and emotional, and that's not a bad thing. And today, I'm here to tell you why I subjectively love Snow White. And Snow White holds a special place in my heart, not just because I like the movie itself and I can gush about it for hours and hours on end, but I grew up with this movie being my dad's favorite movie. And because of that, I was surrounded by Snow White memorabilia and pins and little statues and paintings on the wall. And that really speaks to how beautiful this movie is. Not just with its animation, not just with its stories, not just with its characters, but the sum of this movie is more than the parts itself. My dad has always loved Grumpy. And you would think, that's kind of like a sellout, or, he's just picking the grumpy one because he can. No, Grumpy was always my dad's favorite character. And it's not because he was quote unquote grumpy. Grumpy is his feeling, and that's what is at the forefront. But you don't see him act grumpy with Snow White. And his character development is really powerful because you see him grow to love Snow White, and you see Snow White grow to love him. And there's this mutual connection that's really beautiful that you see between the two of them that grows, and it's really organic. I also talked about earlier that my mom and I dressed up as the Evil Queen multiple years in a row. I wish I was kidding, but we bought those Evil Queen outfits, and I literally wore it every year from the time I believe I was 9 to 11. And that was my last major costume that I had. And my mom and I got to dress up together. And that was my final costume that I got to wear as a trick-or-treater. And that's what I got to graduate to when I was the one that was giving out candy to little kids. So this movie essentially defined my entire childhood. And even now, as a grown adult, I went to Christmas with my parents last year. I was at their house, and the big gift that my mom got was a statue for my dad of all the dwarves on the log crossing the river. Aww. With Hi-Ho coming through when they go back to their house the first time. That movie holds so much love for my family because the sum of it is greater than its parts. And it's really beautiful, and I think that people really count this movie out because it's old and it's got this traditional helpless girl who's just looking for love and just falls in love with a prince and happily ever after. But at the end of the day, it's more than that. There's a whole story behind it, and you can see this girl who has really been given a bad hand in life that was no fault of her own. And you see her make the best of a really bad situation, bring herself out of it, and also finds love, which is what she really wants. And she sees that as an outlet and has her way out of this bad circumstance. So that's why I subjectively love Snow White.
Now, with that being said, the goal of our experiment is to be as objective as possible. So using the categories and criteria we created, our final score is 70.5.
Now, we want to thank you guys so much for listening in. We know that we have gone all over the place with our specific criteria, but if you did like what we put through today, we have been the Defining Disney podcast. Please give us a 5-star rating, a great review, and don't forget to subscribe. Now, if you didn't like what you heard, well, a fine bunch of water lilies you turned out to be. Next time, we'll be talking about Mulan. So pack your bags, Cricky. We're going to save China. It's already available for download, so take a few hours, go watch the movie, and we'll see you back here afterward. Don't forget to check out our website, definingdisney.wordpress.com, and make sure to join our Ohana. That's the only way to get our free sneak peek calendar, so you make sure to never miss an episode. Goodbye.
Bye.